The strangest part about being called a mistake is when the people saying it are standing inside a life you helped build. I never planned to attend my ex-husband's vow renewal ceremony. In fact, when the invitation arrived, I almost threw it away without opening it. Richard Carter and I have been divorced for 15 years. 15 years is a long time to learn how to stop looking backward. I had spent those years building a quiet life for myself in Milwaukee, far away from the country clubs, charity galas, and business dinners that had once filled my calendar. So when I saw his familiar handwriting on the envelope, my first instinct was to leave it unopened on the kitchen counter. But curiosity has a way of winning. Inside was a formal invitation printed on expensive cream-colored paper. Richard Carter and Vanessa Brooks request the honor of your presence at their vow renewal celebration. Beneath the printed text was a short handwritten note. Evelyn, I hope you'll come. It would mean more than you think. Richard, I must have read those 2 sentences 10 times. Richard was never sentimental. During our 22 years of marriage, he was many things: ambitious, intelligent, stubborn, but sentimental was not one of them. The note bothered me for days. Why would he want me there? Why now? Eventually, against my better judgment, I decided to attend. Maybe I wanted answers. Maybe I wanted closure. Or maybe I simply wanted to prove to myself that seeing him again no longer mattered. The ceremony was scheduled at a lakeside estate outside Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. The property sat on nearly 12 acres of manicured lawns and private shoreline. The kind of place featured in luxury magazines with drone photos and headlines about wealth. On the afternoon of the event, I drove the 2-hour trip alone. The sky was clear. The lake shimmered beneath the sunlight. Everything looked picture perfect. As I pulled through the gated entrance, I noticed luxury cars lined along the circular driveway. Valets moved efficiently between guests. Women in designer dresses stood in small groups, holding champagne flutes. Men in tailored suits laughed beneath white tents overlooking the water. It looked less like a vow renewal and more like a celebration of status. I parked, stepped out of my car, and smoothed the wrinkles from my navy blue dress. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't fashionable, but it fit comfortably, and at 58 years old, comfort had become far more important to me than impressing strangers. As I approached the entrance, I noticed something unexpected. Several members of the staff looked at me strangely. Not rude, just surprised. One young woman, checking guest names, actually blinked twice when I introduced myself. "Evelyn Carter," I said with a polite smile. Her expression changed immediately. "Of course, Miss Carter. Welcome." Then she glanced toward another employee standing nearby. The look they exchanged lasted less than a second, but I noticed it. People underestimate how observant you become after years of sitting quietly in rooms where everyone assumes you aren't paying attention. I walked toward the main lawn, overlooking the lake. Music drifted through hidden speakers. Guests mingled beneath elegant white canopies. And standing near the center of it all was Richard. Older now, more gray hair, slightly slower posture, but still Richard. For a brief moment, our eyes met across the crowd. Something unreadable crossed his face. Relief maybe, or concern. Before I could decide which, someone touched my arm from behind and said, "Well, this should be interesting." I turned around and found myself face to face with Vanessa Brooks. Part 2. SUA Vanessa Brooks smiled as though we were old friends meeting at a neighborhood barbecue instead of standing at her vow renewal ceremony. She was beautiful in the polished way magazine covers like to celebrate. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect posture. Everything about her looked carefully arranged. "Evelyn," she said warmly, "I'm so glad you came." Her tone was friendly, but her eyes were studying me, measuring me, looking for something. "Thank you for inviting me," I replied. Vanessa laughed softly. "Oh, this was actually Richard's idea." That answer surprised me, not because I doubted it, but because she sounded almost amused by it. "Was it?" I asked. "Absolutely." She glanced across the lawn toward Richard. I told him it might be awkward. I followed her gaze. Richard was speaking with a group of investors now, but every few seconds his attention drifted back toward us. The behavior was strange enough that even Vanessa noticed. "See," she said with a smile. "He keeps checking." I said nothing. After all these years, I had learned that silence often reveals more than questions ever could. Vanessa lightly touched my arm. Come on, let me introduce you to a few people. Before I could politely decline, she was already guiding me toward a group gathered near the lake. Several guests turned as we approached. Their conversation slowed. I recognized the look immediately. Curiosity. They knew who I was. Or at least they knew who I had been. Vanessa stopped beside a tall man holding a champagne glass. Everyone, she said brightly, this is Evelyn Carter. A few people smiled politely. A few looked surprised. One woman nearly dropped her glass. Vanessa noticed every reaction and seemed to enjoy it. Richard's former wife, she added. The group exchanged uncomfortable glances. Then Vanessa laughed. Do not worry. We are all adults here. The guests laughed politely. The kind of laughter people use when they are unsure whether something is actually funny. I smiled and nodded. The conversation continued, but I noticed something interesting. Every time Vanessa mentioned my name, people reacted differently than she expected. Some became nervous. Others became unusually respectful. One older gentleman actually stepped forward and shook my hand. Pleasure to see you again, Ms. Carter, he said. Again. The word caught my attention immediately. I had never met him before, or at least I did not think I had. Vanessa seemed puzzled too. You know Evelyn? She asked. By reputation, he answered carefully. Then he quickly changed the subject. Strange. Very strange. As the afternoon continued, I noticed more moments like that. A catering manager recognized me. A member of the event staff recognized me. Even one of the security supervisors nodded respectfully when I walked past. None of it made sense. I had never visited this property before, yet somehow people kept acting as if they already knew who I was. Finally, I stepped away from the crowd and walked toward the edge of the lawn, overlooking the water. The lake stretched out beneath the afternoon sun, calm and endless. For the first time all day, I felt peaceful. Then I heard Richard's voice behind me. You came. I turned slowly. He looked older up close than he had from across the lawn. Tired, even. You asked me to, I said. Richard nodded. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he looked toward the mansion behind us and quietly said something that immediately made my stomach tighten. Before tonight is over, a lot of people are going to learn things they do not expect. Richard's words stayed with me long after he walked away. Before tonight is over, a lot of people are going to learn things they do not expect. It sounded less like a warning and more like a confession. I watched him disappear back into the crowd while questions multiplied inside my head. What exactly was he talking about? And why did he look nervous every time someone approached me? The answer did not come immediately. Instead, the afternoon moved forward as if nothing unusual was happening. Guests gathered beneath white tents overlooking the lake. Servers carried silver trays filled with appetizers. A string quartet played near the shoreline. Everything looked elegant, expensive, and perfectly controlled. Then Vanessa stepped onto the small stage that had been built beside the water. A microphone appeared in her hand. The conversations slowly faded. People turned toward her with smiles. Vanessa loved attention. That much was obvious. Thank you all for being here, she said warmly. Applause followed. She spoke about love, about second chances, about building a future together. The audience responded exactly as she expected. Then her eyes found me, standing near the edge of the crowd. I felt it immediately. The shift. The moment when her attention locked onto me. Vanessa smiled. And speaking of the past, she said lightly, causing several guests to laugh. My stomach tightened slightly. Richard's expression changed instantly. He knew where this was going. Tonight is about celebrating how life gives us opportunities to correct old mistakes, Vanessa continued. More laughter followed. She raised her glass and pointed gently toward me. In fact, some of you have not met Evelyn Carter. Heads turned. Hundreds of eyes seemed to land on me at once. Evelyn was Richard's first wife. The crowd reacted with polite curiosity. Vanessa paused just long enough to enjoy the attention. Then she smiled wider. Or, as I like to call her, the past mistake that helped lead him to the right future. A wave of laughter rolled through the audience. Not everyone laughed, but enough people did. I heard it. I felt it. The kind of laughter people use when they think they are standing with the winning side. For a brief moment, silence followed. Everyone waited for my reaction. They expected embarrassment, maybe anger, maybe tears. Instead, I simply smiled. Not because the comment did not hurt. It did. But age teaches you something valuable. The people who need public humiliation to feel powerful are usually fighting private insecurities. Vanessa seemed almost disappointed by my calm reaction. She raised her champagne glass again and continued speaking as if nothing had happened. Yet something strange occurred. The audience never fully recovered. The laughter faded faster than it should have. Several guests looked uncomfortable. One elderly man near the front lowered his eyes entirely. Another woman whispered something to her husband while staring at me. Then I noticed a familiar face moving through the crowd. It was the older gentleman who had greeted me earlier. This time, he was not alone. Beside him walked a gray-haired attorney carrying a leather portfolio. They were heading directly toward the stage. And for the first time all afternoon, Vanessa's confident smile began to disappear. The attorney moved with the calm confidence of someone who did not care about social status or public opinion. He walked straight through the crowd while conversations died around him. Vanessa was still standing on stage holding the microphone, but her attention had shifted completely. The older gentleman accompanying the attorney stopped near the front row while the attorney continued toward Richard. What happened next caught everyone off guard. Instead of congratulating the happy couple, the attorney quietly handed Richard a sealed envelope. Richard looked at it and immediately lost color at his face. Not dramatically, just enough for someone paying attention to notice. I noticed. Vanessa noticed too. "Is everything all right?" she asked into the microphone with a nervous laugh. Richard forced a smile. Of course, but it was not convincing. The attorney said something too quietly for the crowd to hear. Richard listened without interrupting. Then he nodded once. The attorney turned and looked directly toward me. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he gave a small, respectful nod. The reaction around us was immediate. Guests began whispering. People who had laughed only minutes earlier suddenly seemed uncertain. Vanessa tried to regain control of the atmosphere. "Well," she said brightly, "let us not get distracted by legal paperwork on a day like today." A few people laughed politely, far fewer than before. The attorney stepped away and joined several guests near the edge of the lawn. I expected the moment to pass. Instead, it became stranger. One by one, a handful of influential guests started approaching me. Not Vanessa, not Richard, me. A retired judge introduced himself and thanked me for attending. A local business owner shook my hand warmly. A woman who sat on the board of a major charitable foundation asked how I had been. Every interaction seemed perfectly normal except for one detail. I had never met most of these people before. Vanessa watched the entire thing unfold from the stage. Her smile became tighter with every passing minute. Finally, she handed the microphone to the event host and stepped down into the crowd. I saw her speaking rapidly to Richard. He responded with short answers. The conversation looked tense. Then she pointed directly toward me. Richard shook his head. Whatever she asked, he clearly did not agree. That only made her more frustrated. As the ceremony transitioned into the dinner portion of the evening, guests began moving toward the main mansion. The property was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the lake. Crystal chandeliers glowed above polished marble floors. Everything reflected wealth. Yet the closer I got to the building, the stranger things became. Near the entrance stood a bronze plaque mounted beside a stone column. Earlier, I had walked past it without paying attention. This time, several guests had gathered around it. They were staring at something, whispering, reading. I slowed my pace. So did many others. Then one man quietly spoke the words that changed the atmosphere again. "Wait a second," he said. "Why is Evelyn Carter's name on this?" For a moment, nobody moved. The small crowd gathered around the plaque simply stared at it as though the bronze letters had suddenly changed. I stepped closer. The plaque had been mounted years ago and looked like a permanent part of the estate. Beneath the name of the charitable trust that maintained the property was another line engraved into the metal. Founding benefactor, Evelyn Carter. A strange silence settled over the entrance hall. "That cannot be right," someone whispered. Another guest leaned forward and read it again. "No, that is definitely her name." I felt dozens of eyes turn toward me. Vanessa pushed through the crowd almost immediately. "What is going on?" she asked sharply. Nobody answered. One woman simply pointed toward the plaque. Vanessa looked at it. Her expression froze. Then she laughed. It sounded forced. There must be another Evelyn Carter. Nobody laughed with her, because deep down, everyone knew what she was trying to do. They were all thinking the same thing. The timing was too strange. The reactions all afternoon had been too strange. Vanessa turned toward me. "Do you know anything about this?" she asked. I looked at the plaque for several seconds before answering. "I know my name when I see it." A few guests smiled despite themselves. Vanessa clearly did not appreciate it. Before she could respond, the gray-haired attorney appeared again. He had an uncanny habit of arriving exactly when things became uncomfortable. "There is no mistake," he said calmly. Every conversation stopped. Vanessa stared at him. "Excuse me." The attorney folded his hands behind his back. "The plaque is accurate." Richard had just entered the foyer and immediately looked exhausted. He knew exactly where this conversation was heading. Vanessa looked from the attorney to Richard. "What is he talking about?" Richard remained silent. The attorney answered instead. "Ms. Carter was one of the original benefactors responsible for establishing the preservation trust connected to this property." The room erupted into whispers. People who had spent the afternoon treating me like a curious footnote were suddenly looking at me very differently. Vanessa blinked several times. "That makes no sense." The attorney raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because Richard owns this estate." The attorney did not respond immediately. Instead, he glanced toward Richard. Again, Richard said nothing. The silence itself became an answer. I watched confusion spread across Vanessa's face. She was beginning to realize there were entire chapters of history she had never been told. One guest spoke up carefully. "If the trust established the property, does that mean the trust still controls it?" The attorney smiled slightly. "That is an excellent question." Vanessa looked as though she wanted him to stop talking. The attorney continued anyway. "The answer is more complicated than most people realize." By now, nearly everyone attending the event had drifted into the foyer. The musicians outside continued playing, but nobody cared. The vow renewal ceremony had become secondary to whatever was unfolding here. Then the attorney reached into his briefcase and removed a folder. The moment Richard saw it, he closed his eyes. Just for a second. But I noticed, and so did several others. The attorney opened the folder and calmly said, "Since the subject has already come up, perhaps this is the appropriate time to clarify who actually holds controlling authority over the estate." The foyer became so quiet that I could hear the soft ticking of a grandfather clock somewhere deeper inside the mansion. Nobody wanted to leave. Nobody wanted dinner anymore. Every guest seemed trapped between curiosity and disbelief. The attorney held the folder calmly, while dozens of wealthy strangers stared at him as though he were about to reveal the ending of a mystery they had not realized they were living inside. Vanessa folded her arms tightly. "Then clarify it," she said. "Who controls the estate?" The attorney opened the folder and adjusted his glasses. "The estate is owned by the Lake Geneva Preservation Trust." A few guests nodded. That part was already known. Vanessa exhaled impatiently. "And who controls the trust?" The attorney looked directly at her. "The trust operates under a 3-member board." Vanessa waited. Everyone waited. One position is held by the managing attorney. He briefly touched his chest. "That would be me." Murmurs spread through the crowd. A second position is held by the chief financial trustee. He nodded toward an older woman standing near the staircase. Several guests recognized her immediately. More whispers followed. Then came the final position. The attorney closed the folder halfway and looked directly at me. "The third and controlling vote belongs to Evelyn Carter." Complete silence. Nobody laughed this time. Nobody moved. The words seemed to hang in the air above everyone's heads. Vanessa blinked. Once. Twice. Then she actually laughed. "That is ridiculous." Nobody joined her. The attorney remained perfectly calm. It is documented in every trust filing for the last 11 years. Vanessa turned toward Richard so quickly that her hair brushed across her shoulder. Tell him he is joking. Richard looked exhausted. He is not joking. The reaction was immediate. Several guests gasped softly. Others simply stared at me. I could almost see them replaying the afternoon in their minds. The introduction, the laughter, the comments. Every moment suddenly looked different through this new lens. Vanessa shook her head. Why would she have controlling authority over property connected to your family? Richard rubbed his forehead. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Because it was her idea, he said quietly. More silence followed. The attorney nodded. Ms. Carter proposed the preservation trust years before the property was acquired. A businessman near the entrance frowned. Wait, are you saying she helped create the entire structure? Yes, the attorney replied. Without her involvement, the trust would not exist in its current form. I watched the realization spread through the room. Respect was replacing curiosity. Curiosity was replacing judgment. And Vanessa could feel it happening. That frightened her more than anything. Nobody ever told me this, she whispered. The statement sounded less like an accusation and more like a complaint. Richard looked at her, but said nothing. His silence answered the question better than words could have. Then one of the guests spoke up. It was the retired judge who had greeted me earlier. There is something I do not understand. Everyone turned toward him. He looked at the attorney. If Evelyn holds the controlling vote, why has she stayed completely out of public view? The attorney smiled slightly. Because unlike most people who acquire influence, she never wanted attention. Several heads slowly turned toward me again. I felt uncomfortable under the weight of their attention. The irony was impossible to ignore. Less than an hour earlier, I had been treated like an embarrassing relic from someone else's past. Now, those same people were looking at me as though they had discovered someone important hidden in plain sight. Then the attorney closed the folder completely and said the one sentence that changed everything again. And none of this is the most surprising part. The room seemed to lean forward all at once. It was remarkable how quickly human beings could shift from confidence to uncertainty when they sensed a hidden truth. Just an hour earlier, people had been sipping champagne and laughing at carefully rehearsed jokes. Now they were standing shoulder to shoulder in silence, waiting for answers. Even the staff had stopped pretending not to listen. Vanessa looked directly at the attorney. What could possibly be more surprising than this? Her voice sounded strained now. The attorney did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied the crowd. Then he looked toward me. Ms. Carter, he said politely, would you prefer that I continue? Every eye turned toward me. I had not expected that question. For a moment, I considered ending the conversation entirely. I had not come here to embarrass anyone. I had not come for revenge. I had certainly not come to become the center of attention. But then I remembered something. Earlier that afternoon, Vanessa had publicly reduced 22 years of my life to a joke. Not because she knew the truth, because she assumed nobody else did. I gave the attorney a small nod. Go ahead. Vanessa crossed her arms tighter. The attorney opened his folder again. Many people assumed this estate was purchased by Richard Carter. Several guests nodded. That was exactly what they believed. However, the attorney continued, the original acquisition funds did not come from Richard. The silence deepened. Richard looked toward the floor. Vanessa stared at him. What does that mean? She asked. The attorney answered without hesitation. The initial funding came from Evelyn Carter. A wave of whispers swept through the room. Someone actually gasped. Another guest muttered, that cannot be right. Yet nobody sounded confident anymore. The attorney removed a document from a folder. The records are available for anyone who wishes to review them. Richard finally spoke. His voice was quiet. He is telling the truth. That single sentence carried more weight than anything else. Vanessa looked genuinely stunned now. You never told me that. Richard nodded slowly. No, I did not. Why not? The question sounded personal rather than public. Richard hesitated. Then he gave the simplest answer possible. Because it was not my story to tell. Nobody expected that response. Least of all Vanessa. The attorney continued. When the property first became available, Ms. Carter provided the capital that allowed the trust to secure it. The retired judge shook his head in disbelief. Then why does everyone think Richard built this? The answer came from Richard himself. Because I let them think that. The room fell silent again. Those 6 words changed everything. They did not just reveal financial facts. They revealed character. For years, people had assumed Richard was the architect behind everything connected to the estate. Yet now he was quietly admitting that a significant part of the story belonged to someone else. Someone standing only a few feet away. I felt uncomfortable hearing it spoken aloud. Recognition had never interested me. But seeing the truth finally emerge after so many years created a strange feeling I could not fully describe. Then Vanessa laughed softly. Not because she found anything funny, because she was trying to regain control. Fine, she said. Maybe Evelyn helped years ago. That still does not explain why everyone reacts like she is the most important person here. The attorney looked at her carefully. Actually, he replied, that part is very easy to explain. The attorney's answer came so calmly that it took a moment for the room to fully absorb it. People react differently to Ms. Carter because many of them know something you do not. Vanessa stared at him. And what exactly is that supposed to mean? The attorney glanced around the crowded foyer. It means a significant number of people standing here have personally benefited from decisions Evelyn Carter made over the last decade. Confused whispers spread immediately. Vanessa looked from face to face. For the first time all evening, she seemed uncertain about the people surrounding her. A business owner near the staircase raised his hand slightly. Actually, that is true. Everyone turned toward him. 10 years ago, my company nearly collapsed after a major supplier went bankrupt. The Preservation Trust invested in our redevelopment project when nobody else would. He looked directly at me. The approval came from Evelyn. Another voice spoke up. This time, it was a woman from the charitable foundation. 3 community centers in Milwaukee stayed open because of grants she approved. A retired teacher nodded. And hundreds of scholarships. Someone else added, the housing initiative near Madison. Another person mentioned a veteran support program. Then another, and another. The comments began coming from every direction. It was like watching puzzle pieces suddenly connect. Guests who had arrived expecting a glamorous celebration were discovering an entirely different story unfolding around them. Vanessa looked increasingly uncomfortable. Why have I never heard any of this? She asked. Nobody answered immediately. Finally, the attorney said, because Ms. Carter specifically requested that her involvement remain private. That answer only deepened the silence. In a room full of people who measured success through visibility, influence, and recognition, the idea of helping others without seeking credit seemed almost foreign. One guest shook his head slowly. Most people would have their name on every building. The attorney smiled slightly. That was never her priority. Vanessa turned toward me. You never told anyone? I shrugged gently. The projects were not about me. Several guests exchanged looks. I could almost hear their opinions changing in real time. Earlier, they had viewed me through the lens Vanessa created. An ex-wife, a forgotten chapter, an awkward guest. Now, they were seeing someone entirely different. Richard remained silent through all of it, but I noticed something in his expression. Relief. The kind of relief people feel when a secret they carried for too long finally becomes public. Then the attorney removed another document from his folder. There is one additional detail that may help explain why so many people recognize Evelyn. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. She clearly wanted the evening to stop unraveling. There's more, she asked. Quite a bit more, the attorney replied. He handed the document to the retired judge. The judge read it carefully. Then his eyebrows lifted. Good Lord. The reaction immediately captured everyone's attention. What is it? Someone asked. The judge looked toward me with open respect. Then he faced the crowd. This document shows that Evelyn Carter did not simply help create the trust. He paused. She currently owns the largest individual financial interest connected to it. The room erupted into stunned whispers. Vanessa looked at Richard so quickly that several people actually stepped back. You told me this estate belonged to your family. Richard looked directly at her. "No," he said quietly. "I'll let you assume that." The silence that followed Richard's statement felt heavier than anything that had happened all evening. People could accept that I had contributed to the estate. They could accept that I sat on the trust board. They could even accept that I had quietly funded charitable projects for years. But the idea that the property everyone associated with Richard actually depended more on me than him was much harder to process. Vanessa looked completely blindsided. "What do you mean you let me assume that?" she asked. Richard sighed. It was the sigh of a man who had spent years avoiding a conversation and finally ran out of places to hide. "I never claimed the estate belonged to me alone." Vanessa stared at him. "You never corrected anyone either." Several guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. They knew exactly what she meant. Silence can create misunderstandings just as effectively as lies. The retired judge carefully handed the document back to the attorney. "Perhaps people should understand how this happened," he said. The attorney nodded. "That would probably be helpful." He opened another section of the file. Following the divorce, Richard retained ownership of several business interests. Evelyn retained a significant investment portfolio. A businessman near the front frowned. Most divorces do not end that way. Most divorces are not negotiated by two people who still respected each other at the time, the attorney replied. The statement caught my attention. Respected each other. It sounded strange now, considering everything that had happened over the years. It was true. At one point, long before bitterness and distance entered the picture, Richard and I had genuinely respected one another. The attorney continued. Over the following decade, Ms. Carter made a series of investments that significantly outperformed expectations. Several guests nodded. They understood exactly what that meant. Meanwhile, he added carefully, Richard sold portions of his holdings during various expansions and acquisitions. The businessman's eyes widened slightly. Wait, he looked toward Richard. Are you saying she eventually accumulated a larger financial position than you? Richard answered himself. Years ago, another wave of whispers swept through the room. I could see people mentally reorganizing everything they thought they knew. The story they had been told no longer matched reality. Vanessa looked almost offended by the idea. Why would nobody know this? She demanded. Before anyone else could answer, an elderly woman near the staircase spoke for the first time. Because Evelyn never talked about money. Everyone turned toward her. I have known her for 12 years, the woman continued. Do you know how many times I have heard her mention her finances? She smiled sadly. Not once. That observation landed harder than any legal document. The room was filled with people accustomed to discussing wealth, status, and success. The idea that someone could possess significant influence without advertising it felt almost unbelievable. Then the attorney removed a final page from the folder. There is another reason the trust board granted Evelyn controlling authority. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. Of course there is. The attorney ignored the comment. 10 years ago, the estate faced a financial crisis after a major development proposal collapsed. Several longtime local residents immediately recognized the story. The property would likely have been sold, he continued, had Evelyn not intervened. A man near the back looked stunned. She saved the estate, the attorney nodded. Entirely. Then he paused before adding the sentence that caused the room to fall silent once again. Without Evelyn Carter, this vow renewal celebration would not be happening here tonight.